Hey, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Virtual Ocean Pavilion live event from COP27, Harnessing Finance for Addressing Climate Ocean Change, that is hosted by the OA Alliance and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. I am very grateful to be reporting out today from Sharm el-Sheikh on November 9th, which is Finance Day here at COP27. And as we know, this COP is really driving home an emphasis on implementation, and that has meant implementation of NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, that of course outline party commitments to reducing greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide emissions, but it also means implementation of finance commitments to support ocean mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And the many projects, priorities, and finance mechanisms that are going to be needed to deliver on those particular ocean outcomes. So my name is Jessie Turner. I'm the director of the OA Alliance, which brings together national and subnational governments to increase ambition for climate action and to transform our response and our thinking about adaptation to climate and ocean change. However, despite the IPCC's dire warnings, the impacts of ongoing ocean warming, acidification, and oxygen loss continue to be under-recognized by policy and decision makers, sometimes misunderstood or excluded from financing or adaptation priorities. And this is extra problematic because at present, we know that climate financing for ocean adaptation and resilience doesn't reflect necessarily the scale or severity that climate change is posing to our ocean resources and human communities that depend on them. We've been hearing a lot today at finance discussions that less than 2% of climate financing currently flows towards ocean and coastal projects. And of course, we want to be changing that. And you'll be hearing today from many people on the line that are helping to change that. And then increase only 1.6% of official development assistance supports the ocean economy, which again needs to be higher. And today's discussions that we've been attending across COP27 have really focused on what's needed to mobilize increased finance for ocean climate adaptation, and key themes have started to emerge. The first is the need for clear and discrete outcomes and products. We've talked about the need to continue to share risk and what that means and how we think about risk sharing from an ocean perspective. We need more actions that serve society. It might seem obvious, but we've had a lot of calls for, what are the human benefits of some of these projects, and increasingly needing to be articulating what the human benefits of some of these ocean adaptation, coastal resilience projects are. And then, of course, underpinning all of this, the need to enhance local capacity for implementation ongoing. And so really across the board, investments in coastal information, we know that they can be used to inform a broad range of these ocean and coastal strategies, and then the financing that's going to support the projects underpinning them. So to that, we'll get started. Today, it's really a pleasure to hear from practitioners, intergovernmental organizations in the Pacific, and financialisms, innovative and interdisciplinary finance, holistic climate ocean adaptation, and importantly, how we can all accelerate this work together. So over to our first, we are really honored to have our first partner speaking with us today. Dr. Sarah Cooley is the Director of Climate Science at Ocean Conservancy, but in her role today, lead author on working two of the IE's needs. I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit about what that report tells us relative to the needs and what's possible for ocean adaptation at this time.
Thanks so much, Jessie, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I was the coordinating lead author of Chapter 3 in the Working Group 2 report, and that focused on oceans and coastal ecosystems and their services. So in that chapter, we assessed the impacts from climate to these systems and the adaptation opportunities that are relevant for ocean and coastal ecosystems. Next slide, please. This is the slide with the difficult news. The recent report from the IPCC assessed with high confidence that ocean and coastal ecosystems are exposed to conditions that are unprecedented over millennia. These conditions include things like warming and acidifying waters, changing ocean circulation, increased marine heat waves, and loss of oxygen. There's very high confidence that these conditions have greatly impacted life in the ocean and along its coasts. Changes are documented in the abundance and location of species, the timing of seasonal activities, and the interactions of species. There's high confidence that impacts have affected specific industries, and they've caused economic losses, emotional harm, and they've altered cultural and recreational activities. And it's virtually certain that ocean conditions will continue diverging from a pre-industrial state, so ocean conditions will continue to change ecosystems and human social systems. So just a note about the terms I'm using that are in italics on the slide. IPCC assessments use these terms, which are called calibrated language, to indicate the amount, the quality, and the agreement of the evidence that supports particular statements. I definitely recommend reading the report for the best explanation of the differences between these terms if you're interested. Next slide, please. Our chapter assessed the feasibility and the effectiveness of ocean-focused adaptations. Feasibility, which is shown with the blue circles, included several different dimensions. And effectiveness in the yellow circles was evaluated by examining outcomes from models and observations. So we also assessed the ability of different adaptations to address specific marine sectors at risk. Those are the columns on the right with the check marks. What you should take away from this complex table is that there is a long list of ocean-based adaptations. Just look how small the print is in the gray column on the left, listing them all. There's a lot of adaptations that address multiple ocean sectors at risk. You can see that by how many check marks are in each row. These adaptations are generally highly effective, so that's where we see the big yellow circles, and they're often also highly feasible, the large dark blue circles. So notice also that adaptations can be clustered into three major categories of socio-institutional adaptation, built infrastructure and technology, and marine and coastal nature-based solutions. So I'm sure if you can squint, you can see adaptations you've listed or you've heard a lot about listed, like area-based protections or sustainable harvesting, and others you might not have heard as much about, like assisted evolution or institutional transboundary agreements. Next slide, please. The IPCC report assessed that the solution set relevant for ocean and coastal ecosystems and the people who depend on them have two big parts. The first part is that the impacts happening now and projected for the future shows that rapid and ambitious mitigation is an opportunity to keep the ocean system within boundaries that support the ecosystem structure and function that humans and other life on Earth have grown to depend on. Keeping future conditions near 1.5 degrees warming will help avoid social and ecological tipping points. For example, that limit will help avoid widespread loss of warm water coral reefs, the fisheries and ecosystems that depend on them, and the coastal protection that they offer. The second part of the adaptation or the solution set is adaptation, and avoiding high emissions pathways will help preserve the greatest number of ocean-based adaptation options. Ocean-based adaptation depends on relationships among species and the physical world, and among the members of each ecosystem, including humans. Breaking those links with high emissions pathways will close off many of the adaptation options that depend on nature or on traditional methods of resource management. Our assessment indicates that effective ocean-based adaptation relies on portfolios of measures that involve institutions, technology, and nature. No single subset of the adaptation portfolio would be able to offer comprehensive adaptation. For example, we can't just technologically invent the world into robust ocean-based adaptation. We've already seen instances of how excessive dependence on seawalls to address sea level rise prevents coastal ecosystems from moving upland and sometimes creates erosion problems elsewhere. Next slide, please. Our assessment also indicates the ways that in which adaptation is implemented really matter. When talking about sea level rise adaptation, the summary for policymakers states with high confidence, these responses are more effective if combined and or sequenced, planned well ahead, aligned with sociocultural values and development priorities, and underpinned by inclusive community engagement processes. This statement is also true for the entire range of ocean-based adaptations implemented so far. And that's all I have. So thank you very much for your attention. My contact information is on the next slide. Thanks, Jesse.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And of course, Sarah, coming to you live and in color from COP27. So really appreciate your time to be with us today and to, oh gosh, and to huddle in a corner and deliver that overview for us. So thank you. With that, I will turn it over to our next speaker just to set the scene before going into a little bit of a panel of finance practitioners. It is my honor to introduce Director General Nawadra with SCREP, which is the Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Program. And SEPA, or I'm sorry to say, Director General Nawadra, I'm very happy to have you with us also from COP27, just to share a little bit of your thoughts and reflections around ocean adaptation and resilience priorities in the Pacific region. And since you are at COP27, obviously in the negotiations, if anything you'd like to add and your thoughts on how we think about engaging the local information capacity building for that process to apply in a policy management response that largely thinks about ecosystem resilience for human communities. So Director General.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Sarah, for that good synopsis of the findings of the panel, IPCC. I just came back from a meeting with the Director of Research for CSIRO, Australia's research institution, together with our net directors in the Pacific who are also here attending COP27. And we reflected on the presentations yesterday that basically presented the same information you presented to us now. And we must say the predictions were very disturbing, and if any, really brought home that we need to have action straight away. 1.5 to keep alive is a key slogan that the Pacific continues to bring to COP27. The linkages between ocean and climate has been something that we have always fought for from the Pacific and from since. And this is now being validated through the findings of the IPCC. If any, maybe the impacts are much more than we had thought. One of the things that we were discussing with CSIRO is how we can bring a lot of these scientific publications into something that is meaningful for not only our policymakers and negotiators, but also our planners and the general public in our region. I know that the IPCC has made a good attempt at making summary for policymakers. But I think what we were discussing today was how do we get it down to a practical level that we can really start using for planning and for adaptation at the regional and national level. On the things that we're doing in our region to prepare ourselves for what is already happening. The Pacific has always done things as a region because the ocean binds us, and with our small countries, we need to band together to get economies of scale, build up our resources as a group. The leaders, our Pacific leaders this year declared our region as a climate emergency region, recognizing what was outlined by Sarah just now. But we have also come up with a strategy called the Blue Pacific 2050 strategy that we are now developing an implementation framework for, and regional architecture that will allow us to address the issue as a group, as a region. There are 7 thematic areas under that strategy, and one of them is ocean and environment. Looking at oceans, the issues of and the other thematic pillar that's relevant to the discussion today is climate change. So we're looking at how we do things as a region and how we can prepare ourselves for the changing conditions that that we will be facing up to 2050. It goes without saying that we will be needing financing to do a lot of the things that we have identified, but specifically on coral reefs, which is a subset of what we're talking about here, but one that is relevant to the discussion. In 2021, we agreed a coral reef action plan for the Pacific, and there are 4 main objectives. One is the conservation of habitats and biodiversity, because this is what underpins everything. The second is to look at sustainable fisheries and the whole food security issue, because we need to maintain our coral reefs and our coastal habitats in order to have food security for our communities. Islands without fish are not islands anymore, and whole island communities will collapse if that food source disappears or moves somewhere else. The economics of tuna is a big one that drives everything in the Pacific. So changing distribution of tuna that we are already seeing has a real impact on island economies. Looking at the adaptation needs that need to happen. And then the final one that we've identified under coral reefs is a specific issue of sustainable tourism. Most of our tourism in the Pacific is linked to coral reefs and coastal ecosystems. So if you lose that, you lose the tourism as well. So there's a double whammy of tourism and fisheries loss. So it's something that small island economies cannot buffer or recover from. So that is basically the need. We have done what we can ourselves to prepare for what needs to happen. We're fighting as hard as possible to try and get the emissions down so that we don't arrive at a situation where we are beyond 1.5. Maybe I'll end there and can answer any questions later if they come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director General. That's really special and meaningful to have a report out from you at COP27, just right in the thick of it. So thank you for those priorities. And also, I understand that you're quite busy. So if you have to drop off, that's okay. We will understand if you can't stay longer for questions. But thank you very much for that contribution and update.
Thank you. I do have to go now, so apologies. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, sir. Lovely. Well, I think that's a nice way to set the scene for the discussion that we will now begin. We've been thinking a lot at the OA Alliance about how we go from this international set of information on climate ocean change trends, right? So that's the IPCC report, and how we think about what is needed at the regional level, as Director General Nawadra was just discussing, for the type of information that's really going to inform the technical, as what Sefa said, the technical level national action, response, and strategy. And so that's really what we're trying to think about, I think, here at this COP, of how we go from the IPCC level to something a little bit more technically applicable for local solutions, local unique circumstances, and local unique reliance on key ecosystems and species. And so one way that we've been thinking about that from a finance perspective is we have these UNFCCC mechanisms that support or are meant to support adaptation needs. And as you heard Sefa describe, some of those are around food security, reef resilience, nature-based solutions, early warning systems or climate information systems that begin to incorporate more around the ocean coastal change side. And also keeping in mind things like tourism and economic sustainability and economic security as well. And so, as we heard at the front of this call, we don't always have a lot of examples, or we have an increasing number of examples of ocean coastal projects and program focuses across some of these UNFCCC mechanisms. And so now I'm really honored to introduce our next speaker, who is from the Global Environment Facility, which is one of these UNFCCC mechanisms to think about supporting adaptation needs at a regional and local scale. Dr. Leah Carr is the Senior Program Manager of Ocean and Marine Resources. I'm making that up, looking weirdly at my papers, so you'll have to correct me, Leah, apologies, at Jeff. And I'd love to just hear your perspective. You've been an incredible champion, and this community is so lucky to have you in the role that you're in. Just to provide us some perspective from Jeff about the coastal adaptation and resilience investments that you have been making to date, including through the Least Developed Countries Fund, but also around things like wetland restoration, shoreline protection, aquaculture projects. And just from your perspective, where you've been, where your priorities have really helped us think about what's possible, and where you see the next 5 to 10 years going in this work.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. It's a real pleasure and honor to be joining this panel of such distinguished experts. I'm already learning a tremendous amount from Sarah and from Stefan at SPREP. Just to ensure we're all on the same page, the Global Environment Facility is a multilateral trust fund, which was established as the financial mechanism for basically developed countries to provide funding for developing countries to meet their obligations under various multilateral environmental agreements, such as the climate change agreements. So I bring good news in terms of funding opportunities that's available to tackle coastal adaptation. We've been tackling climate change related to coastal marine ecosystems since we started over 30 years ago, and have provided over $1 billion in country allocated finance for ocean climate action, including mitigation and adaptation. So in terms of what are the real opportunities for financing through the GEF, there are kind of two buckets I think we could look at it as. The first is, as you mentioned, the Least Developed Country Fund, which is also associated with the Special Climate Change Fund. These focus on LDCs and small island developing states to build country resilience to the impact of climate change. They're really tied to communities and how they're impacted, such as from flooding, storm frequency, and other impacts. And they're kind of within this bucket of LDCF and SCCF. There are kind of 4 types of projects that are funded, and they correlate nicely with some of the issues that were previously mentioned, which is not by luck. The first is in helping countries assess their vulnerability and adaptation potential. What are the climate change impacts on coastal communities and ecosystems and how they might adapt? The second is deploying nature-based solutions to reduce impacts, particularly around coastal habitat restoration of mangroves and reefs to help dissipate, for example, storm surge. We've, just as a couple of examples, we have a great project in the Comoros, which is focused on resilience building efforts around reforestation and the revitalization of watershed areas, including mangroves to reduce flooding from storms. And we also have a great project in the Pacific developing a coral reef insurance policy similar to what's occurred in the Mesoamerican reef system to support coral reef rehabilitation after major storms. The third bucket is on strengthening early warning systems and disaster management. And this kind of also, again, reflects a community focus. We're not just focused on the ecosystem and the habitats and the species, but also looking at how people are affected. An example for the early warning systems is a project in the Gambia, which is strengthening climate change early warning systems to allow for rapid response to extreme weather, as well as to ensure the safety at sea for fishers. And the final bucket, the final type of project we fund is building resilience of fisher folks to climate-driven changes in fish migratory patterns and other factors affecting stock, which often affect their livelihood. So the good news is we were recently replenished in July with over $1 billion. We now have a new suite of funds for LDCF, and this includes for obviously coastal and island LDCCs, which may access each up to $20 million over the next 4 years for adaptation. And there's also opportunities for non-LDC SIDS through the SCCF, which is a smaller window of funding. Now, that's kind of the main kind of obvious source of funding related to adaptation through the GEF. The other more indirect way is through funding measures related to the GEF Trust Fund, related to biodiversity and international waters, which have covered coral reef and mangrove restoration and protection. One of the big projects we have is what's called the Blue Nature Alliance. It's focusing on increasing new and improving existing marine protected areas with a goal of conserving 1.25 billion hectares of ocean ecosystems. We've also been replenished for the GEF Trust Fund. We'll be continuing to work on marine protected areas. We also have an emphasis on coastal marine management, restoration, and conservation. We're also expanding our work into aquaculture, which may include techniques for increasing resilience to climate impacts. And we have a program specifically on small island developed states. So I hope that gives you an understanding of kind of the opportunities for funding, and I would welcome the chance to talk with colleagues further. You can always reach me at my first initial L, car@thegef.org, and feel free to send me a note in the chat. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Leah. That was an excellent overview of GEF and the coastal ocean resilience projects that you have really been helping shepherd, and look forward to sort of the next phase of expanding across both of the funds that you mentioned. One of the things we've also been hearing a lot today at Finance Day is sort of that tension between getting some small pilot projects developed, or increasingly developed, but then also how do we think about the scale? The scale of investment that partners like GEF are really focused on is sometimes, almost too large to apply to some of these projects that are really in pilot evaluation stage, and sort of how do we think about that bridge and what's useful for that bridge. So I'm really grateful in that context to turn it over to our next two speakers and then open it up for discussion. And thank you so much for joining, Leah. So with that, I'll turn it over to, sorry, I don't know if you can hear that flying over, but this is Heads of State Day, perhaps flying in and out. I'll turn it over now to Leticia Carvalho, who is head of Marine and Freshwater Branch at UN Environment Program. And Leticia, I'm so happy to have you with us today to talk a little bit about how UN Environment Program has been thinking about your mandates and mission relative to this question. And then if you're willing to tell us a little bit more about the Coral Reef Development Fund thinking about the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and how some of the projects are taking shape through that, and how that Global Fund for Coral Reefs is acting as a bridge, potentially an incubator for what's possible, and even what's possible for blended finance. So turning it over to you, Leticia, and I do have your slides, so I'll go ahead and put them up.
Excellent. So greetings from Geneva, where I'm attending the Ramsar COP14, and also a great opportunity to discuss and shine a light on corals ecosystems and all the wetlands ecosystems as well. So it's a great opportunity. I'm delighted to be here with you, and definitely I will shine a light on this brand new initiative that's the Global Fund for Coral Reefs that makes actually a complementary work with what Leah just presented in terms of funding and leveraging the capacity of all stakeholders in delivering on the ground the conservation and restoration of corals. So let me shine a light on UNEP, because we have also a very distinct role as implementing agents for the GEF International Waters, where we join hands with Leah and colleagues in GEF Secretariat to leverage demonstrative and incremental projects. And at the same time, we also have a very important role that I will discuss and present to you, and in the board of the constituency of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, together with other UN agencies and a number of key private sector and philanthropy actors as donors. So coral reefs are not just valuable, they are absolutely vital. So please give me the second slide. And reefs support 1 billion people and a quarter of all marine life globally. The potential loss of coral reefs would be catastrophic. I think you all know about it, but it's important to hammer: collapsing livelihoods, eroding food security, decreasing coastal protection, and towards the climate adaptation efforts. Coral reefs may be most valuable ecosystems on Earth, but they are also the first facing extinction in our lifetime. Next, please. I need to cover this very critical aspect of the triple planetary crisis we are facing. And the IPCC tell us that at 1.5 Celsius degrees of warming, we will lose between 70 and 90% of reefs. At 2 degrees, it is 99%. This is an ecosystem truly on the front line of the climate change. And it means that while we work to get leaders to act with urgency to reduce emissions, we must also be working, 1, to better understand reef systems, 2, to take action to increase their resilience, and 3, to lessen local stressors like pollution and sustainable fishing practices. This requires urgent and significant funding, and this is precisely the point I want to share with you. This requires more than just public resources. Private resources are critical to bridge, and you mentioned this word, Jess, bridge the coral reef funding gap. Give me the 4th slide, please. So aiming to accelerate reef positive investment and realization of the potential of a blue economy at global level, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs was launched less than 2 years ago as the first and, to my knowledge, only dedicated initiative, only blended finance instrument dedicated to coral reefs globally. Next, please. Under this blended approach, sequenced funding is catalytically positioned to incubate reef positive business models, establish sustainable finance mechanisms, and accelerate anchor investments across seeds, LDCs, and reef-rich developing states. These pipelines these pipelines are developed and de-risked at the program level through traditional grants, as well as GFCR's Blue Bridge service that offers concessional loans, technical assistance, and guarantees. Blue Bridge, the GFCR, Blue Bridge is further de-risking these initiatives and the projects, also through the fund level for private investors. As a result, we have $125 million already committed from the Green Climate Fund as a first loss tranche to the GFCR investment fund. I think these are very great news. Next, please. Funding issued through the reef positive investment ecosystem is aligned to a single theory of change focused on 4 outcomes. First, protecting resilient and functioning coral reefs. 2, transforming coastal societies away from activities that degrade reefs. 3, restoring coral reefs through a new science-based approaches. And finally, and fourth, recovering communities from major shocks to avoid further reef degradation. This theory of change aims to minimize local threats while increasing the resilience of local reef adjacent communities, improving food security, coastal protection, and sustainability livelihoods. Next, please. Let me speak a little bit from the theory of change on how the coalition of partners work together through the GFCR. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is driven by a powerful and growing public-private coalition of philanthropies, member states, UN agencies, and private sector impact investors, including the governments of Germany, the UK, France, and Canada, governments of program countries, the recipient countries, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, the Green Climate Fund, the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, Builders Vision, Pegasus Capital Advisor, and the International Coral Reef Initiative, together with the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Environment Program, and the United Nations Capital Development Fund. It's a great coalition of partners joining hands towards what we are here at COP27 pleased to announce that the United States is joining the GFCR coalition via USAID, and committing $15 million US dollars for an Egyptian Red Sea investment, precisely where the COP is happening. This coalition is taking action to widen and diversify the funding spectrum for Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water. Next, please. So targeting the most climate resilient reefs on Earth, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs has already initiated implementation in 12 countries. And this is the status quo that we are very proud to share with you right now, including in Fiji, the 4 Mesoamerican reef countries, Papua New Guinea, the Bahamas, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and through a regional program in Kenya and Tanzania, as well as a new program just launched in this COP, during this COP in Colombia for the Seaflower Biosphere Reserve, announced this week at the COP. By the end of 2023, it is anticipated this program implementation will expand to encompass more than 25 countries. This is what we hope and what we are working hard to get it. Next, please. So the planning of program solutions begins with, this is a bit of how we operate and how the GFCR delivers. So the planning of program solutions begins with assessment of local degradation drivers in each ecosystem. Often threats to reefs include sewage pollution, destructive tourism activities, agricultural runoff, destructive fishing, as well as poorly funded marine protected areas. Next, please. Based on assessment findings, a program supporting financial and business solutions to unlock conservation finance and address drivers of degradation is designed case by case. Supported solutions can include and generally include sustainable fisheries and mariculture, sewage and wastewater treatment, plastic recycling facilities, organic fertilizer sources, and ecotourism enterprises, as well as sustainable finance models for marine protected areas and coral reef insurance. Next, please. Lead program partners called convening agents are selected to implement in partnership with local incubators, civil society organizations, UN agencies, conservation organizations, and entrepreneurs. Years of existing conservation efforts are brought to the next level through innovative finance and support for local economy. So my last slide, please. And in conclusion, it is clear that at this pivotal moment, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs Coalition is driving forward the bold choices and cutting-edge investments. I would like to invite state governments, private sectors, financial institutions, and philanthropies to join this effort to accelerate nature, restorative blue economy, and safeguard coral reefs for generations to come. I just need to add a final point. Have been recently visit Sharm el-Sheikh with UNEP Goodwill Ambassador Ellie Goldwyn. I got to see myself the unbelievable beauty and complexity of the Great Phrygian Reef system that exists in Egypt, and how it is remarkable. Resilience is so special and so complex to do the ecosystem drivers in this region. I really encourage everyone that is joining the COP27 to get into the sea and to see what is at stake. Thank you very much, Leah, and I'll be here for questions. You're muted.
Thank you so much, Leticia. That was a wonderful overview of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Lots to remark on and chew on, but excellent contribution for our discussion on Finance Day. I want to highlight a couple things. You mentioned, yes, we need the public funding from UN bodies as well as other entities, but also thinking about the private funding, and that's very important to think about that blended approach. And one of the speakers this morning from one of the kind of kickoff events from climate finance was somebody from the Bezos Earth Fund, and he sort of said, private can't replace public finance, and nor should it, but it can move faster, take more risks, and be creative. And I feel like what you guys have done with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is such a lovely example of using that GCF support to really help blend and make something that is multifaceted, that is creative, and that kind of checks those boxes that we talked about earlier. You know, it has, discrete outcomes, it's sharing risk, it serves society, and you're enhancing local capacity. And one more thing, just because I'm very excited by the presentation, really liked how the set of reef solutions are diverse, but they're also terrestrial in addition to coastal and ocean related. And you want to put those in, so it's ocean, it's really show how the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is bringing that work together and bringing those solution sets together, valuable and so needed. So thank you for that great presentation. That you'll stick around one more presenter, and then we'll open it up for a little Q&A before our closing remarks. But now, great privilege to turn it over to Dr. Fahd Al-Guthmi, who is Program Director of Conservation Finance at Wildlife Conservation Society, who's going to be telling us about a really innovative sustainable reef investment project. Again, now we're going from sort of that big GEF perspective to something that's the Global Fund for Coral Reef, and now examining something that's a little bit more discrete, a little bit more localized and unique, talking about a project in Kenya and Tanzania. So Fahd, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jesse. Thanks for inviting me to speak at this important event. And you're right, Letitia has given a great elaboration of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs on a global scale. And trickling down to implementation scale, I'd like to speak of one of the programs that GFCR is running in Kenya and Tanzania, and that is in collaboration with the Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS. It's a wonderful program that leverages the financial muscle of the private sector to complement the traditional grant-based initiatives that we are accustomed to. So for several decades, WCS's marine program in the Western Indian Ocean has been working with governments, development partners, and communities to conserve coastal and marine resources in Kenya and Tanzania. The marine program has worked with stakeholders in co-designing and implementing projects that address threats to coral reefs, associated seagrasses, and mangroves, in addition to also improving community well-being through implementation of science-based approaches. Our work has focused primarily on unsustainable artisanal fisheries and locally managed marine resources, improved management of marine protected areas, protection of endangered marine species, and also supporting the development of marine policies together with the governments at national and local levels. And the marine program supports actions that help our governments in meeting regional and global commitments, including the Nairobi Convention, the Paris Agreement, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, GFCR selected WCS as the convening agent to spearhead the implementation of a fairly new program called Miamba Yetu Sustainable Reef Investments, with the aim of supporting businesses that have a positive impact on coral reefs and the communities that rely on them. Miamba Yetu is actually a Swahili word that means our corals, and it offers a unique WCS opportunity to create sustainable financing for coral reef improvements. And it does this in a critical climate refuge, the Kenya-Tanzania Transboundary Conservation Area, otherwise known as the TBCA, which is a bilateral agreement that is currently being developed between the two countries of Kenya and Tanzania. The program is unique, again, because it invests in bankable projects whilst reducing threats to coral reefs, and thus aims to enhance resilience to climate change. Now, as I said earlier, the program began earlier this year, and it covers the area with shared coral reefs between Kenya and Tanzania. And the amount that is being financed is up to $40 million worth of grants and private capital over 10 years for eligible projects or businesses in the region. Under the grant window, WCS is supporting things such as technical assistance, new project development, capacity development, and also M&E activities. And under the investment window, The program provides financing such as concessionary loans and equity investments, of course, as was mentioned earlier by Leticia. And these are, of course, to businesses and also community groups that directly or even indirectly contribute to coral reef conservation and sustainable development. Now, we're exploring various pathways with partners to protect climate change refugia in the region. And some of these pathways include restoring watersheds to reduce sediment pollution and secure water supplies. And currently we're working with the Tanga Water Fund that TNC is spearheading to see how we can contribute to that cause to reduce the problem of sedimentation and agricultural runoff. We're also looking at helping businesses restructure debt in return for the protection of coral reefs along the coastlines. And we're looking at doing this in collaboration with the community. So inclusivity is a key factor when we're structuring our financial deals. Thirdly, we're looking at reducing sewage pollution to reefs. One of the companies that we're looking at supporting is called Sanivation, that is supporting the county government of Kilifi in its waste management and treatment master plan. And so we're working with them on that. And we're also looking at creating community fisheries closures and co-managed areas linked to ecotourism operations that can ensure sustainability as well. Also, something that's catching on quite a bit in the region is blue carbon ecosystem protection and restoration, more specifically the mangrove and seagrass restoration. And then finally, of course, we have to explore ways to invest in and accelerate coastal community scale enterprises that increase resilience. Now, of course, we're not really looking at small scale, we're looking at aggregating small scale so that at least impact can be significantly measurable for a project of this scale. And to help us achieve this, we're in the process of establishing a special purpose vehicle, which is a legal entity. And we'll do this in Kenya in order to catalyze and attract other sources of private capital. I mentioned that we'll be doing it in Kenya, but we're still under the scoping phase, and we could be establishing the SPV in a different jurisdiction, depending on the outcome of the feasibility study that we're conducting. Now, large-scale commercial deals that will drive significant measurable impact are prioritized in this program. And we, as a program, look forward to and are always on the lookout for partnerships to synergize our efforts to help address the degradation of coral reefs. And with that said, thank you very much. And back to you, Jessie.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dr. Agutmi. That was a great overview. And I have many questions because this is all new to me, this whole climate finance speak. And it's been really good to sort of get a sense of the discussion here at COP. But of course, I think for a lot of us coming to this from some of us in ocean science practitioner space, some of us at coastal resource management space, this is just kind of a whole different set of mechanisms, language even. That's what we talked about a little bit today at some of the events earlier. And so it really is, not just building bridges between the types of project partners, but truly just the type of understanding of what can this be for, what can it not be used for. And I really appreciated your slides, the difference between debting and bonding capacity versus grants and technical support, and that we can think about having both of those things, but they are maybe different vehicles for those, in addition to things like risk insurance, insurance products. So with that, I'll ask Leah as well as Leticia to go ahead and turn on your cameras, and Dr. Agutmi, if you'll stay with us as well. And just wanted to invite any questions. Sarah, if you're still with us, you're invited to, but of course I know that you might be in more technically difficult spaces. I'll open it up to questions. I have one or two ready to go, but if anyone has questions, go ahead and use the Q&A box and we'll open it up, and perhaps I can maybe kick us off to get started. I have just a quick question for you, Dr. Agutmi, just to, again, because I don't come from it with this type of background, the business benefits that you're talking about. Can you just describe in the project that you presented on, what are the business benefits to something like that?
Yeah, so good question, and that's why when I began, giving my talk, I began by emphasizing on how important leveraging the muscle behind the private sector is when it comes to these interventions. In the development world, we're so accustomed to grant-based financing where you'll have a project, and then after a couple of years, you've moved on, and then when you go back and look at the outcome of that project, most of the time you'll find that it's not really working out. It's not very sustainable. And so because of that sustainability aspect, the going concern of a business, it's important to combine the efforts between the development partners and the private sector. Very, very important. The private sector is massive, a lot of opportunities, and a lot of the concerns that are being raised, even at COP, are as a result of things that are being done in the private sector. So we need to influence them in a positive way by providing them with catalytic funding and de-risked opportunities for them to go into sectors such as coral reef protection and conservation. And a lot of the time when I sit with some of the potential partners that we want to finance and have these discussions, they don't understand how we can be able to have that dotted line all the way to the coral reefs. They're looking at the bottom line. So our job, our role is to sort of introduce them to the importance of conserving our coral reefs. And that's one of the first things that I discuss with potential partners.
That's great, and not at all unfamiliar with a lot of our work at the OA Alliance to say, hey, did you know about ocean acidification? Did you know that carbon emissions are also going into the ocean and changing the chemistry, and really starting there, and really recognizing that. And so all of our work, we have such a specific way to think and talk about things, and this assumption that everyone just starts with that baseline of information. I think taking a step back across the board when we're thinking about this holistic response to climate ocean change, and being able to your point, really start with partners at square one and not make those assumptions later. So really appreciate that intervention. Leah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna second that idea and the importance of often philanthropic organizations like the Jeff and the Global Coral Fund in de-risking investments from the private sector, from impact investors, multilateral development banks. And so at the Jeff, I think we're doing better at playing that role and making sure that we are seeing sustainability in terms of the financing long-term, so that there's not a continuing dependence on philanthropic support and even government support, but it's now blended finance. That shifts increasingly over to more sustainable private investments. And we're seeing that in fisheries, and now also in our work in plastic pollution, where there's a lot of innovation opportunities. That's
great. Well, I look forward to working with you all to already building the glossary of joint terms in a way, that would be helpful, I think, at least in my space. Leticia, did you want to add anything? I don't know if I saw your hand up or not. Oh, on you. Oh, no. Okay.
Yes, no, very quickly, it's just to resonate this point about de-risking and how the blended finance, I think, brings or come to this space that is de-risking the whole portfolio that is normally really risk averse if you build upon only governmental and government support. But then the beauty of the blend financing with philanthropy, with private sector is, of course, the idea that you can de-risk a whole pipeline of projects and local interventions. And this is precisely the bridge that I think we have been trying to build this space. And also another aspect is, of course, when you speak about corals, you bring immediately in this approach also the land, and in particular the wastewater component or wastewater management component. That is, of course, heavily financed by governmental funds, and it's also a way to scale up through the locally managed, let's say, interventions. How can you scale up and bring attention and shine a light on this, let's say, very basic infrastructure component that governments have to join hands? So it's a really interesting space.
That's great. And I have one more question, although I'll see who wants to take it. Let's say this, who wants to raise their hand on it. And then I'll turn it over for closing remarks from our special guest with us, Sylvie Goyer with the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation. But we talked again a lot this morning about the need for, I don't want to say more science, but I'd say the right science to be informing some of these strategies, to be evaluating these strategies over different periods of time, but also that we need to be going now, and that a lot of the project applications require some pretty concrete proposals that we know are going to deliver the outcomes that we're looking for. And so I feel in a lot of cases, we're sort of in this, chicken and an egg of needing some of that more tailored local information and sense of evaluation over some scale of time, whether that's a couple years or 5 years or 10 years. But we also need to get started on things in locations, particularly that aren't going to have that type of data, kind of ready to go. So how do you think about both and, what's the approach there? And have we seen projects that are doing that? Or is that something that we still need to be thinking about getting started with incomplete information, but having a real shared sense of the deliverables for that information?
Well, I could just say briefly, almost all of our coastal adaptation projects that we fund have some sort of vulnerability assessment piece, and the depth depends on the context. So as you said, in some cases, there's very little information, and so that would be more substantive piece of the project. But we are very action oriented at the Jeff in terms of we tend to fund more policy development, business practice change, as opposed to research and value. And so we see that as important, but we want to make sure there's actual change going on. And in some cases, that means doing pilot initiatives while more research is underway to determine what are really the priorities. And the pilots allow kind of to get our feet wet and to start working on kind of low-hanging fruit, obvious changes that are needed.
Great. Thanks so much, Leah. Go ahead, Fuad, and then I'll turn it over.
That's actually a very relevant question to the program because, like I said, it's a 10-year program that's divided into 24-month tranches. And we didn't even have a project proprietary grant, to do the preliminary studies or research. What happened was we were given the ability to build on our pipeline during this first tranche of funding, in addition to doing our ecological assessments, getting the updated baselines, doing the national threats assessment side by side. So we have two teams. We have the conservation finance team that is building on a solid pipeline, and they're able to feed in with the marine science teams in order to conduct the science-related assessments side by side. And then through our program board, which consists of two technical advisory committees, that is the finance-related committee and also the ecological committees, we're able to do both in parallel. So it's really a very, very clever way of making sure that we fast track implementation.
That's excellent. Well, I need to stop there. Oh, Leticia, if you want to add one more sentence, and I'll turn it over for closing remarks.
Second, yes, indeed, we are very much data-driven as well, but I think the key word here is interoperability, is how can we make the local data also to fit into the big platforms like SDG monitoring, and, one nurture the other. And essentially, I think these projects are also looking to, of course, discover the local drivers, but as well, to have a relationship with the global data that we have, like the SDG targets and others under conventions, and really bring the governance together in terms of data and knowledge management.
That's wonderful. Well, that's a really great discussion, all. Thank you so much for being part of it. I look forward to more discussions with you all through the Alliance and other partners, thinking about how we continue to build all these bridges towards the outcomes that we want. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Sylvie Goyer with the Prince of Monaco Foundation to close us out here today and provide her perspective from the amazing work that the foundation has been doing for years and continues to do, investing in this type of innovative financing.
Hello, very good to see all of the friends around the table, if I may say. We're here in the middle of COP27. It's been a bit hectic, a bit difficult to connect to the internet. I apologize to you all. I wasn't able to follow the beginning, but I'm here. Very good to hear some of the comments and programs and the great things you're doing. I just have a few closing comments, if I may, JC. We've heard a lot, and in particular this morning, that finance and investors are indeed ready. They're all here, money is here, but what we're missing are bankable projects. Yet when we talk to some of the NGOs, and we heard FAD earlier on from WCS, projects are here. So what's missing? There's probably something missing there, or language problem, as Peter Thompson was referring to this morning. So let me give 3 quick points and to that effect. First, I think we need to think of projects in an integrated program, in an integrated way. We in the environmental sectors have been focusing a lot on the E of environment. We really need to have projects and programs that do bring about the social and the economic dimensions as well. That's what we're doing with the GFCR, and thanks, Leticia, for bringing up the Global Fund for Coral Reef and the types of programs that the fund is promoting. So there is no way these days to do a program without the 3 pillars. I'd say second, we need to recognize that investing in ocean and investing in adaptation in particular, and thanks to Sefa from SPREP for highlighting the priority for the Pacific on adaptation. Indeed, as the director mentioned, this is the critical priority for the Pacific. Now, investing is difficult already because we don't have the science, the risk is unknown, the metrics is not there, it's already difficult. Investing in adaptation is even more difficult. It's very unlike mitigation, where the metrics is clear, the targets are relatively easy to grasp. In adaptation, it's a whole ecosystem that has to be comprehended. It's all of the linkages have to be looked into. It's all of the stakeholders that have to be brought around the table. So investing in ocean adaptation, my gosh, this is a challenge. So it really does take effort, and particular effort. And in that regard, you have, some of you, and maybe all of you, have alluded to the risky business and the need for financing to be de-risked, or at least the risk to be lower, the credit worthiness to be enhanced. I can't agree more. And how do we lower the risks? How do we build trust with the investors? All of this issue gets me to my third point, which is, I believe, for this type of program and for what we are after in ocean adaptation, it is about technical assistance, particular technical assistance. We are doing this with the Global Fund for Coral Reef, and let me again promote that program, if I may. The technical assistance bit to really ensure the regulatory framework is in place, to ensure the institutions are on board, to ensure that the science is on board. And of course, Sarah, you've mentioned that we have the particular science to fit the program. And you mentioned the right science and the science that fits the program. We need to have this technical assistance as well to carry to all the business studies. If we're talking blue economy, if we're talking an integrated program, we do need to have the studies that go with it. The market studies, the feasibility studies, the business, the rate of return studies. So all of this, I believe the technical assistance is something we have to come up with. So to me, those are the 3 things I wanted to bring out as closing remarks. Let me as well mention that all of you around the table and many more, whether we're talking international NGOs like WCS, UN organizations, or science partners, or multilateral funds like the GEF, all of these partners are there. So we have to make use as much as possible of the expertise of these partners, putting coalitions together, convening all the different stakeholders for the same purpose. That's what we're trying to do with the Global Fund for Coral Reef. That's what we at the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation really strive to, as a convening platform, to bring the partners together. Thank you for that opportunity. Thank you, Jesse, for inviting me for the closing remarks. And again, kudos to all of the partners around the table for the amazing work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylvie. And with that, thank you to everyone that joined the Virtual Ocean Pavilion today. Just tune in for the program for the rest of the 2 weeks, which you can obviously find easily, and check out our virtual pavilions. We are grateful for everyone engaging here at COP, and perhaps even more grateful for everyone engaging at home and continuing to keep up the support and momentum and information sharing as we go. So thanks so much, organizers of the Virtual Ocean Pavilion, for having us.